Thursday Night Lights predates Friday Night Lights, both the 1988 Odessa Permian Panthers and that show y'all like with the alcoholic fullback from Dillon, Texas. The squads in the all-black Prairie View Interscholastic League were made to play on Thursday and sometimes Tuesday or Wednesday night to make way for the segregated all-white teams who played on Friday. But if you waited until Friday, you missed some of the best high school football teams and players quite literally in history. Just a handful of them are represented here. Dick, Night Train Lane, Gene, Upshaw, Bubba, Smith, and Mean Joe Green. The PVIL was created as the Texas Interscholastic League of Colored Schools because it had to be. If black children were going to have a chance to compete at all in 1920, even amongst each other, by 1939, Tilks, had taken on a new name, PVIL, and adopted a formal, rules for districting, playoffs, and a state championship game under the leadership of Houston Yates coach Andrew Patterson. The league took off with Elsie Anderson winning the first PVIL state title in football in 1940, and the PVIL, Football League did not stop rising until 1966. This, though the University of Texas fielded its last all-white football team in 1969. But from 1920 to 1970, anybody who'd heard of the PVIL, knew just how fertile that soil was. Problem was, not enough people did, but it wasn't for lack of trying. If you found anything about us in the papers, it was just the championship game or the major scores, this according to Houston Yates coach Luther Booker. Mostly, we were totally ignored, and I think that was terrible. While the National Football League counted a black player, Fritz Pollard, from 1920 to 1928, it did not count another until UCLA's Kenny Washington signed with the Los Angeles Rams in 1946. From 1960 to 1965, the Booker T. Washington Bulldogs were the best program in Conroe, Texas. Conroe played in the state title game in 5 out of 6 of those years. Those boys were so good that white folks made sure not to miss them play at all, even though it was standing room only, several rows deep at the stadium. Just 70 years prior, in 1889, the first school for blacks in Montgomery County, Texas, had opened in a log cabin in Willis, and it was called the Colored School. In 1870, a Yankee came from Illinois to Montgomery to teach a 3-month school for Negroes, this according to a history of Montgomery County. In a few weeks, he disappeared and was soon replaced by another who taught for a few weeks. One morning, the Negro children went to school and their teacher did not arrive. Finally, someone reported that the professor had been found drowned in the town creek. The Negroes were told that the man had slipped from a footlog while crossing the stream and drowned. Other reports were that he was murdered and thrown into the creek by local citizens who resented a Yankee teaching the Negroes. This soil, as I said, was talent-rich. Frank Moning was a member of the 1960 undefeated PVIL champion Conroe Washington team. He graduated from Washington and was recruited to play at Prairie View A&M by Billy Nix, and he was joining some absolute studs. The Panthers won the 1963 NAIA national title with Otis Taylor, Ken Houston, Jimmy Kearney, and Alvin Reed to go along with Horace Chandler, among others on the roster. And Moning, he was nowhere near the best player on that team, even as a member of the PVA&M Hall of Fame. He also didn't sniff being amongst the best players the PVLI ever produced. The PVLI, had a small footprint, but still, as I said, Bubba Smith, Jerry Levias, Ernie Big Cat Ladd, Ray Doan Dillon, Eldridge Dickey, and Lil Joe Washington, along with Otis Pointer, Alan Merchant, Ural Johnson, and Leo Taylor. Alphonse Dotson became the first small college player named to a major All-American team as a senior at Grambling in 1964. He played in the PVIL. Dickey was the first black quarterback ever taken in the first round of the NFL draft and a full round ahead of Ken Stabler. Both were drafted by the Oakland Raiders. 6 PVIL players earned selection to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, including Mean Joe Green and Ken Houston. In 1951, Ollie Matson led the country in rushing and the University of San Francisco to a 9-0 season and a top 15 finish. Homer Jones came out of the league and ran 9.3 seconds in the 100-yard dash on his way to, well, the New York Giants. A handful of PVIL alumni went to predominantly white institutions after high school. Jerry Levias attended Southern Methodist and Bubba Smith attended Michigan State. But most matriculated to historically black colleges and universities in or near Texas. Wiley, Bishop, Texas College, Jarvis Christian, and Prairie View A&M to go along with Texas Southern or, Grambling. In 1966, David Big Daddy Lattin and Texas Western beat Adolph Rupp's Kentucky, again, for the national title. Well, Lattin played at Worthington and the PVIL. In 1969, though, Otis Taylor took a pass from Len Dawson, on a house call in the Kansas City Chiefs' 23-7 win against the Minnesota Vikings in Super Bowl IV. Lattin was one of more than a dozen players selected in the NFL draft in 1967. But none of them really held a candle to the best player I think ever came out of PVIL. It's a story that Michael Hurd tells in his book titled Thursday Night Lights about the legend of L.C. Anderson High School. Its 1944 football team scrimmaged the Texas Longhorns at its peak of dominance in the PVIL. Anderson featured Dick Night Train Lane on its team, and they are said to score the only touchdown in the game, and they won. 6 members of the Super Bowl I Kansas City Chiefs were PVIL alumni, but none might have been as great a force as Lane. And you had to be. You had to be some kind of locomotive to earn that moniker of the most feared defensive back ever to play the pro game. Vince Lombardi called Lane the best cornerback I've ever seen. He was 6'2", 200 pounds, and hit like the train running 2 minutes late. He even had a signature move, a hit stick, he called the Night Train necktie. It was a clothesline that the NFL found even more dangerous than helmet-to-helmet contact for more than a half century. If Lane didn't hit a receiver after he didn't make the catch, that was probably because he made the catch himself. In 1952, Lane recorded 14 interceptions for the Los Angeles Rams as a rookie. 72 years later, his NFL record still stands. What's more, PVIL alumni Lester Hayes and Emmett Thomas sit tied for 2nd and 3rd on the list with 13 and 12 interceptions in a season respectively. Pro Football Hall of Fame defensive back Lem Barney spoke plainly about Lane's prowess on a football field. He said, "Train will always be the godfather of cornerbacks. He was as large as some linemen of his era. He also was agile and very fast. His tackling was awesome. He did the clothesline and other tackles that just devastated the ball carrier." End quote. Not bad for a man whose mama left him in an East Austin trash can. Emma Lane found him wailing in the garbage, and she raised him. After graduating high school at L.C. Anderson in 1946, he played 1 year at Scottsbluff Junior College in Scottsbluff, Nebraska. After that, he enlisted and stayed in the Army for 4 years. In 1952, while holding down a job at an airplane factory, he found himself at a Los Angeles Rams training camp, trying out at wideout and defensive back. Over the next 13 years, he made 7 Pro Bowls, 7 All-Pro teams, and led the league in interceptions. Twice. When Lane retired, he did so with 68 interceptions, just over 5 a year, and 6 touchdowns. But the best back that Joe Washington ever saw was not little Joe Washington. Matter of fact, Joe Washington had two boys who just barely missed playing in the league that helped him rear so many. Ken and Joe Jr., little Joe Washington, wasn't that good at football. Wasn't that great a football player, according to his pops. Joe Sr. knew from football players, even as he remained skeptical of Joe Jr.'s football abilities until a group of boys came banging on his front door looking for his namesake. He said, "My boy is too small. He can't play with you guys." They said, "He's better than all of us." His dad did not believe them. But Joe Sr., a renowned high school football coach at Lincoln Port Arthur then and Bay City Hilliard before that, he still didn't believe his boy was that good, even as Joe Jr. ruined junior high school opponents. I'm sure that there's some junior high kid out there that still knows that he got beat down by Joe Jr. Nobody believes him. But Joe Sr. didn't watch junior high football, even with a boy on the team, because he was too busy with the varsity. But the junior high coach nagged Joe Sr. about Joe Jr. He said, "His coach asked me to come down and look at Joe, who was already better than all the kids we have. I went to one game. They were playing for the championship, and Joe scored about 30 points. But Pops, he didn't push it, not even when he got to high school. At Lincoln High in Port Arthur, he didn't play his son at his natural position of running back until he was a sophomore. That was the year Joe Jr. became a Texas high school sensation. 1971, with little brother Ken at quarterback and Joe Jr. at running back, Lincoln finished 11-1 with a district title. Ken later played for Hayden Fry at North Texas and 2 years of pro football in Canada. Joe Jr. did a little bit better than that. He was so good and so sought after as a high school senior that he was featured on the cover of Parade Magazine High School All-American. Oklahoma's Barry Switzer won his recruitment. Together, Switzer and Joe Jr. won 3 Big 8 titles, and Joe Jr. was a 2-time All-American in 1974 and 1975. He finished his senior season as runner-up for the Heisman Trophy. The San Diego Chargers made him the 4th overall selection in the 1976 NFL Draft. Joe Jr. finished his professional career with All-Pro honors in 1981, led the NFL in catches in 1979, and won a Super Bowl ring with the Washington football team. Joe Jr. did all that, and his pop still never thought he was the best he'd seen. That honor went to a player he coached at Hilliard named Sam Clark. Joe knows that, Joe Sr. said. He saw him play. He was bigger than Joe, 200 pounds, could catch, run punch back as quick as a water bug. He was the best running back I ever had. Joe Washington Sr. didn't even think his boy was the best. That's how good PVIL was.